Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. Larry Jorgensen first became addicted to the sport and business of snowmobiling after buying his first sled, an Arctic Cat, in 1967. He purchased that cat from the first Arctic Cat dealer in Green Bay, a local shoe repair shop which had a total available inventory of 2 machines. Jorgensen was fortunate to become a writing member of the pioneer cross-country snowmobile group, the Peninsula Pathfinders of Upper Michigan. He participated in the club's first 3 long-distance rides, including the 1970 trip across the giant Mackinac Bridge, which connects Lower Michigan to the Upper Peninsula. Although he owned the Arctic Cat, he had been convinced to ride an Eskimo snowmobile, and it may have been the only time an Eskimo sled crossed the Big Mac.
Well, I have on my computer 6 o'clock. And so it looks like, certain times of the year we get a small group, usually December and January. But the beauty of this book club is all of these meetings we have get recorded. And Brandy does a beautiful job. And so people can watch the recordings and they're archived. And so it's a great piece of UP history. And I'm really glad that everyone's here tonight because I just thoroughly enjoyed this one. I probably say that every month, but this one was nostalgic for me because, like I was just saying, some of you missed it. My father was a snowmobiler. He was the owner of a 68, 69, and a 72 Arctic Cat, and he also had a 71 Skidoo. And so when I send the recording note out, I'm going to dig out those pictures of me on the snowmobile as a little kid, just for you guys to see. So it was just a great book for me to read. It brought back a lot of memories, and it was so informative. I mean, my son even picked it up, all these different transformations of the snowmobile, and then that huge snowmobile for Antarctica. I just can't wait to hear more. So normally Victor tells us a little bit about UPPAA. He's got some laryngitis, so he said just to tell you guys the Dandelion Cottage contest goes on till the end of January. We also do not know who the UP Notable Book winners are for 2026 yet, but as soon as we know, we'll set up a schedule. And we might be taking the month of January off, or it might be on, so keep checking your email. We'll let you know as soon as we can. Maybe if we've got a shorter book, we could squeeze it in there in January. We'll have to see. But without any further ado, I give you Larry Jorgensen to talk about Make It Go in the Snow.
Make it go. Well, we tried to make it go, and a lot of people were very successful at that. But also, we've got part of the book to talk about people that weren't quite so successful. But I think probably the first person to talk about is Carl Ellison, because he truly is credited with making the first snowmobile. And it really wasn't the first, but it was the first that utilized what became the standard of snowmobile mobility, which was the moving track and so forth. And he had a little hardware store up in northern Wisconsin, up in Sainer, Wisconsin, and he worked on this thing for a couple of years before he finally got one that would work. And engines were hard to come by, and he used all sorts. He used motorcycle engines, anything he could get his hands on to power his new invention. And it did become very successful. In fact, to the point where, and I wrote down the number, I think it was like he made 30 of them within the first 15 years that he was producing these back in his shed. And people started finding out what he had going on, and they wanted them. He couldn't keep up. So he was able to work an arrangement with a company in Clintonville, the four-wheel drive company, that they would produce them, and he would sort of sell them on a royalty basis the patents that he developed for creating the snowmobile. So Carl created what's called the first snowmobile, and a lot of that technology was used as other companies. I think next was to really get into it was Polaris using his technology, and of course you talk about Skidoo. We had Skidoo not too far behind, but his model was taken over by the company and the four-wheel drive company, and they actually moved the production to Canada. And they made them there in Canada for quite a while. And pretty soon, we have Skidoo got involved, Bombardier, if you want to pronounce it properly. They got involved, and everything sort of got ahead of Carl's invention, and they lasted for a few more years, but finally they couldn't keep up with the trends, and four-wheel drive had more important things to make, like four-wheel drive vehicles. So that was the end of the Carl Ellison snowmobiles. But if you're ever in Sainer, Wisconsin, there is a museum there. It's a historical museum that has some of the original models, and right across the street in Sainer, and you can't get lost, it's a very small town. The original store, the Ellison hardware store, is still there and is still operated by the descendants and his family. So, and of course, they have a display of the original snowmobiles as well. So it's worth a trip if you're ever up in that area, Sainer, Wisconsin. But anyhow, make a trip and see some of the original snowmobiles. It's kind of ironic. There were other people, including his I think it was his son-in-law, his brother-in-law. I'm sorry, his brother-in-law, that tried other ways to make a snowmobile go, and one of the ways he tried was with air power, and I think we got a picture of a one called the Snow Devil, and that was actually powered by an airplane engine and an airplane propeller, and it was built just about 20 miles away from where Carl Ellison was, a gentleman that owned a resort not too far from Eagle River, Wisconsin. He and his brother-in-law built this thing called the Snow Devil, and it was pretty unique because in those days, a trip to town was about 12 miles through the snow, unplowed roads, obviously, and to go to town to get supplies and so forth, they'd snowshoe in. And so he decided we have to have some sort of power to get us through the snow, and along came the Snow Devils. Well, the problem with a Snow Devil, it would go like crazy. In fact, going through the woods, it would knock limbs off of trees and make all sorts of noise. But the problem was it didn't have any brakes. So you had to take along a passenger for two purposes. Number one, to help stop the machine, get out and hold on to it. And number two, you also took along with the passenger some snowshoes, because if there were problems with that particular Snow Devil, then the passenger would put on the snowshoes, and he would go in back and work on the engine, do whatever had to be done, and then spin that propeller to get it going again. So he was sort of the person that made it go, and he was also the person that made it stop. But they'd get into Eagle River, buy up supplies to take back to the resort, and to survive the wintertime up there. You didn't have snowmobilers making a journey up there. It was strictly snowshoes and whatever transportation you could get. But he was very successful with his little Snow Devil. And I got to add just a little personal note here. that particular person was my grandfather. So I guess by heritage, I sort of got addicted to snowmobiling. I don't know, but that was Harry Jones, and he was one of the pioneer resort owners in the Eagle River area. And I'm looking at the picture of his snow devil right now. But there were other people that thought, and we've got a picture of another um, air powered snow vehicle. This one was called the air sled. And for those of you who are familiar with snowmobiling, you may recall the name Scorpion. It became a very popular snowmobile back in the 60s and 70s. But the guys that set out to build, ultimately build the Scorpion, that was not their intention. Their intention, the company they had was called Trailer Sled, and they were in Crosby, Minnesota. And their intention, they thought, boy, if we could develop an air-powered snow vehicle, which is what you see in that one picture. And they did, in fact, create that's air sled. The problem was, well, first of all, it would go like crazy, and they had developed a way to reverse it so the prop would help slow it down and so forth. And other people in the industry, other companies in the industry thought, gee, this might be the trend. And Polaris was one that they actually ordered 50 of those and had them badged, labeled Polaris snow sleds. Problem was somebody got hurt because of the propeller, and badly hurt. And all of a sudden, the attorneys and the legal advisors to these companies said, you could get into a real lawsuit, some real legal problems with that machine if you decide to keep making them and selling them. So Polaris, I've been told, brought in whatever was out there and actually destroyed them. But there are still a few around. And actually the people at Trailer Sled, which became Scorpion, they have an annual event in Crosby, Minnesota, where whatever these air sleds are available and are running, attend this event. And it's on a lake, and they have a big festival and other Scorpion snowmobiles and a little ice fishing, and just make a big party out of it once a year. So that was one attempt at air power. Now, there was an even earlier attempt, and I think we've got a picture of that. Victor, maybe you could help me on this. Yeah, that's the picture of Bombardier, Joseph Bombardier. And he was, in fact, a young man. It was his name that became the Bombardier Company and produced Ski-Doos. But when he was 15 years old, and the picture you see there is of, he was coming home. His dad had given him an old Model T engine. And he's, what am I going to do with this? So when he come home from school, he would work on this concept of an air-powered snow vehicle. And what you see in the picture is, in fact, what he came up with. And he proudly, one Christmas vacation time, got it running and showed it to his father, and they took it out for a ride. It was fantastic. It worked well. But his father also was sort of like the guys at Scorpion. He said, somebody is going to get hurt with that. And I suggest that as soon as possible, you turn that down and don't do that anymore. So that was in fact the very first Ski-Doo, Bombardier, whichever way you want to pronounce it, that was ever made. And there is in Valcourt, there is a museum that is the Bombardier Museum, and there is a model of that, not the original, but they reconstructed a model of that. So if you wanted to see what old Joseph Arnold Bombardier created, there is a a reproduction, and in Valcourt, Quebec, of his first snowmobile. So there were a lot of attempts to power vehicles through the snow. Now, the next picture I hope we've got there is of it goes back to the name snowmobile. You know, people think, well, snowmobile, that was old Carl Eilson invented that in 1924. Well, but actually the name snowmobile, I have to look at my notes here. The name was copyrighted in 1917, and it was copyrighted by a man in New Hampshire who invented an attachment to a Model T where you would, and you could see him in the picture there, you would put these tracks, so to speak, on the rear wheels of a Model T, and that would become a snowmobile. And he patented and copyrighted the name snowmobile. And Henry Ford was so impressed with it that he said to the gentleman, if you can make those, I'll give you exclusive rights to sell them to all my Model T dealers, all my Ford dealers. So he made a lot of them. And the picture of that you see there is, in fact, there is a still existing a club that has the Model T Fords with the attachment at the back. Well, what happened is that particular attachment was patented, and he sold the rights to that attachment to another company, and they made similar attachments. And in fact, one of their units actually went to the North Pole. Didn't do too good, South Pole, I mean, but it didn't do too good there. But anyhow, they had bragging rights, and it went to the South Pole. And from there were other companies. There was a little company in Wisconsin. What was I got get the copyright, the name of it. It was Altoma, Wisconsin, and a company there, just a little company that made farm equipment. The one guy saw this attachment, and he said to his guys, this is something we could do in the off season when they're not farming. We could make these kind of machines. And they started making them. And actually, they made 3 different models. They made a high track that would go through when things were muddy and roads were impassable. They made a kind of like a tractor, a big bulldozer type. And they continued doing it until the Second World War came. And the problem was the people that worked for them, all the guys went into the service and they couldn't get enough steel to build what they were building anyhow. So they just finally gave up the ghost and quit making them. But for a long time, they were doing real well with their little machines. They'd make those for wintertime. And then in the summertime, they'd go back to making implements for farming and so forth. So it was another attempt to actually power a snow vehicle, and again, it was an attempt by air. I think, Victor, bear with me here. I think our next picture is the big one. Let's see what I've got here. Yeah, there's a story behind that for sure. That was went to the Antarctica, and that was the third adventure of Admiral Byrd, who was, of course, known for his explorations of the South Pole. And this was just prior to the start of World War II. One of the gentlemen who had been with him on number 2 expedition realized that they were having a lot of problems with snow vehicles down there, because they would, like the twin track ones, they would fall into the crevices, they had very little success with him. So he went back to Chicago, where he had a research group that he worked with, and he designed this huge snow vehicle. It was he thought, this is the answer. I've got one that when it goes to Antarctica, it will be so big it can't fall through the crevices, and it was so big that they actually had a deck on top where they could land an airplane. So it was multi-purpose. But the problem, and you'll see in the book a picture of it going through a town, and it took up both lanes of the town. It was so huge, but it was a large snowmobile, but it was a large failure as well. They finally got it to Boston to get it on Admiral Byrd's third ship going to Antarctica. And at that point, the government, the president and others started to be concerned about the Antarctica, because they were afraid that other countries were going to go down there and claim the territory, and it was sort of anybody's game who could get it at that point. So they supported this effort to make this huge machine and to support Admiral Byrd when he went down. Well, they got down there and it didn't work. The tires would not dig into the snow to move the thing. And ultimately, it was used sort of as a bunkhouse for the guys that were down there working with dog sleds and other means of transportation to explore the Antarctica. In the meantime, the government kind of pulled in their purse strings, and the thing just it ended up staying there. One time, a exploration crew went down and tried to find it, and they did dig down, and they found it. And ironically, it was still in the condition of when it was originally taken down there. The men had been using it as sort of a bunkhouse. There was magazines inside of it and so forth. So they didn't find it. But then another crew that went down years later looked for it. They couldn't find it, and they figured that as the ice shifted, that it probably eventually went off to sea and is sunk somewhere in the Antarctic Ocean down there, and who knows? But it was a tremendous failure, and but it sure got a lot of attention in its time. So that was an interesting. He had, by the way, he had it built in Chicago, and he had connections with the Pullman Company. Now, you may know the name Pullman from Pullman train cars, because that was their thing. That they made Pullman train cars and for passengers, and they were hired to do this humongous snow vehicle. I don't even want to call it a snowmobile. So another attempt that turned out to be a failure, and we can, being the Upper Peninsula, everybody knows Henry Ford and how much he liked the Upper Peninsula, and along came an idea called a screw-propelled machine. Now, this was very old technology. The way it would work is each side of the vehicle, and he used a Fordson tractor. On each side, there would be this huge screw that would dig its way through the snow, and so that was what powered the Fordson tractor and other vehicles that tried to use that technology. was a screwed propelled on both sides to dig its way through the snow. Seemed like a good idea. In fact, there was a company formed in Detroit that was going to market this idea, and there were several automobile manufacturers that got involved in it, thinking that yes, this could be a good thing for us. Well, Henry got all involved in it, and people at Ford got involved in it, and they had the opportunity after trying it with one Ford tractor, and it performed rather well. They had an opportunity to work with the National Geographic and with an exploration group that wanted to go to the North Pole, to Point Barrow. The idea was, in those days, they were still thinking that there was land to be discovered in the Arctic Ocean. And what they were going to do is they were going to fly out of Point Barrow and survey the Arctic Ocean to see if there was land that could be claimed for the United States. Now, where the snowmobile comes into play in this, they needed to get airplane fuel, aviation fuel, to Point Barrow. Now, if you're at all familiar with Alaska, and I've been there, so I'm somewhat familiar, from Fairbanks to Point Barrow is this well-known Brooks Mountain Range. It's very high and obviously very difficult and covered with snow. Well, the idea was that they would take the Fordson and they would make a train of Fordson pulling sleighs loaded with fuel to get to Point Barrow, so they would have fuel for these airplane, the airplane that was going to go out and explore to find new territory for us. Well, once they had their caravan put together of sleds and several of the Fordson tractors, it didn't work. It was too much weight, too much snow, and too rough a terrain. I mean, trying to go through the Brooks Mountain Range was very difficult, to say the least. So I think they went about 20, 30 miles, and they finally gave up on it. And there is, again, looking at, if you want to see one, there is a museum in Fairbanks that has a model of the original, one of the original ones. It is not a model. They were able to get one of the original Fordson units that were on that experiment to go to Point Barrow. Needless to say, the failure of the whole mission caused Henry Ford and company to no longer think that that was a viable means of snow transportation, and that was the end of that project. So, but there are a few of them around in museums, but not many. Another failed attempt. So we can see in the book that not all the attempts were good. In fact, we've got several chapters in there about modern day snowmobile companies or would-be snowmobile companies that had some failures. And I think the most interesting one is how Honda tried 4 different times to create a consumer snowmobile. And I don't have pictures of that, but there's 4 different versions, and there is one called the Snow Fox, the White Fox, which is on display at the museum in Nobbinway, the vintage snowmobile museum up in Nobbinway, and it's a fantastic story. And again, it's another story of an attempt to get into snowmobiling that didn't work. And Honda, they make lots of good things, but they never made it with snowmobiling. So that there is, by the way, a copy of the that type of propulsion. A gentleman in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, had found a small, and he called it a wormmobile. It was abandoned in the woods in northern Wisconsin, and he had found it. And he was an advocate of restoring old tractors and taking them to shows and things like that. And he found this old model of he called it a wormmobile, and he actually restored it and sold it, and it is on display up at that snowmobile museum in Nominally. So there were several attempts to get through the snow, and not all of them were successful. That's for sure. But we've got a lot of that in the book, and we've got pictures to go with all of them, and so forth. I don't know how long. Guide me on this. How long you want to go on? Because I can tell all kinds of stories. But if
that's what we're here for, Larry.
Yes.
Excuse me?
We're here for the stories. I think this is the picture of that fox you were talking about, right?
It's a picture of yeah, that's the
silver fox, snow fox.
That's the white fox, and that is in the museum up in Nominally. And what happened there? When I talk about, we can talk about that one. At first, Honda decided they wanted to get into snowmobiling, and their dealers, their motorcycle dealers, they saw that Kawasaki was getting into it. Yamaha obviously got into it big time, and the motorcycle dealers that were selling the other brands told Honda, we need a snowmobile as part of our inventory to sell. And so Honda decided they would create a snowmobile. And they created their first attempt, which was not the White Fox, was powered by a motorcycle engine, a four-cycle. It was very heavy, would be very expensive, and they took that idea to some of their dealers at a dealer meeting, and the dealers just shot it down. They said, we can't sell that. It's too heavy. It's going to be too expensive. It's a four-cycle. Snowmobiles are two cycles, and they shot it down. So then we go to what is the picture you showed me of the White Fox. And so Honda went back to the drawing boards, and they said, okay, we'll go in a different direction. We'll make something very light. And so they made 300 of those. And they introduced them in Wisconsin and in Michigan to dealers in those states. And they said, this is the answer. You can sell this one. This is light. It's a one-man machine. And it's something you can put in your inventory. Now, when you see in the book, or when you see the picture, you'll see that the way it was configured, the driver sat with his feet up front. It was a rear engine machine, and the driver had his feet up front. So they issued like 200 to 300 of these to select dealers to sell in Wisconsin and Michigan. It was out for about 6 months, and Honda recalled them all. They said, we want them back. We're not going to sell them anymore. And the story I heard, and I think it was a pretty reputable story, that there was a very serious accident up in Canada with somebody using one of those. And because his feet was out in front, there was no protection really of whatever he hit, and he was badly hurt. And that word got back to Honda, and they said right away, were going to recall them all. And they recalled them. There were, I think, 5 or 6 that survived the recall. One of them is the one that's in Nobbinway. There was one that went to a museum out on the West Coast. There was another one that a collector got and didn't know what he had and auctioned it off. Anyhow, there were 5 or 6 that were saved from being destroyed. So that was basically number 2 for Honda. Number 3, they teamed up with, in fact, if you look at the White Fox, it was powered, the power behind was to 2 little tracks. It was a twin tracker of sorts. So Honda then went to a company in Michigan. They made a snowmobile, a twin track snowmobile, the Raider as it was called, which was getting some popularity. And it was different because you sat in it instead of on top of it. You sat like in a little cockpit. And Honda thought that's the answer. And so they started working with that. Well, to make a long story short, they had some prototypes and they were ready to go with it. And they got into a management disagreement with the company that was working with them to make it. And ultimately pulled the plug on the whole thing. And that never happened. Now, a few of those also got out to collectors, and there are a few of them around. And I do have pictures of them in the book. So that was attempt number 3 for Honda to get into the snowmobile business. Attempt number 4, and it never really took off in the United States, but I understand they did sell quite a few of them in Japan. It was an attachment that you could put on a motorcycle to convert the back part so it would become a track, and it somewhat resembled a water vehicle, like a jet ski or something. It kind of resembled a jet ski, but it had a ski and it had the track in the back. And they did unveil it to the press in the United States. And a gentleman from Snowgoer magazine had the opportunity to drive it, to take it for a test drive. And his comments were afterwards, you had to stand up to really maneuver the machine. And he said it was just too hard to handle. And it never took off either in the United States. But I understand they did sell a fair amount of them in Japan, and that was another thing. So it was 4 attempts by Honda, and who knows, they may still get into it, although there's a lot of companies, as you know, that have gotten out of it, Yamaha being one, which last year announced that they were going to quit making, and that was much to the disappointment of the Yamaha dealers, because Yamaha was making a very successful snowmobile. A little personal story I could tell you. I think we've got a picture. I think, Victor, we have a picture of the Peninsula Pathfinders.
Yep, coming. Give me 1 second.
Pride and joy.
And here it comes.
And the picture is of a group of snowmobilers. This would have been back in 1970, succeeding in crossing the Mackinac Bridge. They claimed to be the first one, and I was fortunate enough to be with them. There are other people that say, no, they were probably the second one, but whatever, they did cross the back. And I can tell you 2 stories that are not in the book that relate to that group. That was a group that their whole mission in life, in snowmobile life, they were based out of Marquette, and was to prove that there is a need for cross-country trails throughout the snow country, and of course they concentrated on Upper Michigan primarily. Their first trip was, and I was on that one as well. It was in 1969. Went from Copper Harbor to Green Bay, Wisconsin. The second trip then was across the Mackinac Bridge, and that went from Marquette to south of the bridge to Portage Lakes. There was I think the area is known for having, there's a tip-up town down there every year. It's a big event, and the snowmobile trip across the bridge was to go to this particular festival. Now, the two stories that are not in there that I can tell you because I was part of that trip across the bridge. In those days, we had gotten permission to go across the bridge from a senator from Ironwood. Some of you may know the name or may remember Senator Mack, quite appropriate to go across the Mackinac Bridge. Well, he had given us written permission to, by all means, cross the bridge. So we snowmobiled into St. Ignace the night before, attached wheels underneath our skis, which was a requirement. And the next morning, we took off for the bridge. Well, when we got to the toll booth, the toll man there said, "Where are you guys going?" We said, "Across the bridge." He said, "You can't cross the bridge with those snowmobiles." We said, "Well, we have permission from Senator Mack." And we showed him the letter. Now, being a state employee, he probably knew he should do something about this. So he called the Michigan State Police and said, "Could you send a car up here? We have a group of snowmobilers that want to go across the bridge." So the state police sent a car, and the toll master showed the officer the written authority we had from the great Senator Mack, and the officer thought, "Yeah, we better let him go." So he's told the man at the toll booth, "Let him cross. It's fine." The man at the toll booth said, "Oh, wait a minute, we have to charge a toll." And he said, I have buttons here to push for cars and for trucks with multiple wheels." He said, "I don't have a button for snowmobiles. What do I charge them?" And the police officer said, "Just charge them each $1 and they could go." So the officer gets in front of us and he says, "Now I'm going to take you across the bridge, single file behind me, do not speed and stay in line." So away we go, across the bridge. And again, this is the part that's not in the book. We get to the top of the bridge, and a friend of mine, who was also riding in that group, pulls out of the line. And not only does he pass everybody that's ahead of him in the line, but he passes the squad car. I'm like, what is he doing? Well, here comes the squad car. He's got his lights on, and he pulls the guy over, and he says, "I told you, single file, get in line." And my friend got in line and finished the trip. So we get to the south side of the bridge and stop before we journey on, take the wheels off, and so forth. And I said to him, "John," I said, "what were you thinking up there? What did you do that for?" He said, "It's simple. I wanted to be the first guy to get a ticket on a snowmobile on the Mackinac Bridge." Well, obviously he didn't get his ticket and he didn't get his souvenir, but that was his mission. He wanted to get a ticket and to be the first snowmobiler to get one on the Mackinac Bridge. So not in my book. I didn't want to tell on him, but anyhow, it was an interesting experience. I did get a chance to ride with the Peninsula Pathfinders. That was the group on 4 of their trips, and they went. One of the trips was from Marquette to Brainerd, Minnesota. And they would go further each time. Finally, and I bailed out after the fourth because I had gotten involved in snowmobile racing and other things that I was just running out of time to do. But their last trip was actually, we're going to go home. We're going to Finland. They went to Finland by air and then had a arrangement with a company in Finland that made snowmobiles, and they toured Finland. I think one of the most interesting trips that they had, though, and it's in the, there's a picture in the book. They went from Marquette through Canada to the East Coast. And when they got to the East Coast, one of the snowmobilers went into the Atlantic Ocean with his snowmobile, and it's a not a real good picture, but there's a picture of one of our Upper Michigan snowmobilers riding in the Atlantic Ocean with a snowmobile. So they were quite a group, and they were fun to ride with, and I'm sure there were a lot of memories of them. I don't know how many of them are still around that would share memories, but I know there's sons of them and grandsons that have shared information with me as well. So it was a treat, and as you can tell, not only did I write the book, there's the picture of the one in the snow in the ocean, but you know, I think Victor once told me, he said, if you're going to write a book, write about something you're enthusiastic about. And
That's
I'm
right.
enthusiastic about snowmobiling, that's for sure. So it was easy to do, and obviously I'm very enthusiastic about the Upper Peninsula as well. I really enjoy getting up into the Kimono, and were I younger and more resilient to snow, now I would probably be living in the Upper Peninsula with all of you. And you can tell more stories if you want. I don't know how much time you've got. So,
well, we usually open it up to questions for a little while. Does anybody have any questions for Larry?
Yeah, that would be fun. Don't be afraid.
Well, while they're thinking of one, I had one. I thought this was kind of surprising. Oh, I bet I lost my page now, but you said something about there was when they were racing. Yes, here it is. On October 23rd, 1970, the Blue Flame, driven by Gary Gabalish on the Bonneville Salt Flats, established the world land speed record of 622.407 miles an hour.
Yeah, that's an interesting story because it goes back to, some of you may remember a snowmobile called the Snow Pony. It was a small sled. It was made in Minneapolis, and one of them, they were always, the guy that had the company. He was a promoter. He was always trying to come up with ways to get the name Snow Pony in front of the people. And one of his mechanics came up with this idea of, let's go for a speed record, had the fastest snowmobile on snow. And what they did is they purchased what was to be a dragster. A guy in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, had built this machine to enter in competition, but he had run out of money, and it's just his family finally said, we're spending way too much money on this, and he sold basically his concoction, his would-be drag car, because he was going after world speed record too, and he sold that to Mr. Fox and his mechanic, and they converted it to what was called the Snow Pony. And I can remember going to races, and he'd have that thing there. It was powered by a jet engine, and they would have it at the snowmobile races. They'd never race it, but it would be back in the pits, and every once in a while they'd fire it up. It would be this tremendous noise of this jet airplane and so forth. And they finally said, "All right, we're going for the world's record." And they took it east to Lake Placid, was frozen over, obviously, and they established the world speed record at that time for snowmobiles. There was some discretion because the rule book said that it had to be powered by a track, not by a jet engine. Oh. But they found a clause in the rules that said there was an experimental class, and they let the thing qualify as experimental. Well, as it happened, Snow Pony, at that time, the man who owned it, decided to sell the whole operation. And he sold it to a company that, in fact, was owned by Studebaker. But it wasn't called Studebaker. It was a Gravely, wherever, I forget the exact name, but they were based out of Minneapolis. And they took on the Snow Pony line, produced snow ponies, and they also said they were going to make a bigger one. Well, Studebaker at that point was in trouble. They were in financial trouble down in Indiana, and they didn't have the money to continue with this snowmobile adventure, and they finally just pulled the plug on everything. So what happened to the dragster? Well, that thing originally got purchased by a snowmobile parts manufacturer in the East, and he simply he set it up on his shop as an attraction to get people's attention. It didn't have the airplane engine anymore or anything like that. And later on, the guy who originally designed it was able to buy it back, and didn't get it back, didn't race it or anything, but he was able to get it back and to keep it. So it's, again, another attempt at snow pony. Was actually a pretty good little sled. It was a small sled. It was a very compact sled, and there's an interesting story if you're into racing on snow ponies, because in stock snowmobile racing, the smallest class was Class A, and that meant that the engines could be no more than 250 cc's, and there has to be a production of at least 100 of them made to be considered stock. Well, Mr. Fox and his inventive mechanic came up with an idea to put two McCulloch, and in those days, McCulloch was not just making chainsaws, they were making go-karts, and they had a go-kart engine. And they put two of them, they were 101 cc's each, into this snow pony. So there were two engines, it made 202 cc's, which classified them in the A class. But someone protested that, said, well, that's not a stock machine. And they were able to produce production records that showed they had made 105 or whatever. So they were then classified as a stock A machine, and they could run against the other stock A's, like the Skidoos and so forth. Again, I'll throw in a personal note. One of the guys in Green Bay that was a distributor for Snow Pony, and he knew I was racing. He came to me and he said, would you race this new Snow Pony we've got? It's got two engines, and it goes like crazy. And I said, yeah, I'll try it. So I did, and it was interesting because the two engines in front of you. They were like chainsaw engines. They were drag these drag car engines, the go-kart engines. And to get the machine running, you had to start both engines at the same time. So you'd be on the sled and you'd be pulling two starter cords at once. If you only got one started, it would not allow you to start. It would kill the first one. So you had to get them both going at the same time. I raced it in a couple races, and it was indeed fast. I won some trophies, but the thing was, it was also very hard to handle. And you go like crazy down the straightaways, and then you get into the corners. And in those days, they didn't have ice tracks. They had snow, and it was piled up, and it was rough. And you'd get in the corners, and this thing would just fly all over the place. But then you'd pass everybody in the straightaways with your two McCulloch chainsaw engines. It was a lot of fun, but I finally said, that's enough of that fun. Get back to something real here. So that's another story, another addiction. I see a hand. Somebody wants.
Hi, this is Kent. Just wondering, I was thinking about snowmobiles in movies and just looked up, there was a 007 movie, A View to a Kill, where there was some pretty old-fashioned snowmobiles, probably high-tech for the time, but do you have any favorite movies that feature snowmobiles? Any familiarity with that, or were you mostly out of
I don't.
trails?
I have seen a couple of what you're talking about, but I guess got so many memories of things that I've done. I just, I've gone with my memories. I wish I
Sure.
could think of the name of one, because I have seen some pretty good ones.
Yeah,
And
the Roger Moore
yeah,
is riding one in A View to a Kill, if anyone wants to see one in action.
And Kent, if you want to see that snowmobile, I just saw it. It's in Green Bay. There's a wonderful automobile museum downtown Green Bay, and they have a 007 exhibition. And I think it's on until January, but they had that snowmobile there to see.
Okay, thanks.
there's another
Oh,
hand.
Mary's got a question, and Debbie.
Just a quick comment on the idea of snowmobiles used in work. I don't know if any of you know where the Targhee National Forest is. It's along the west side of Yellowstone National Park, real high elevation, and they get, 7 to 10 feet or 12 feet of snow on the level, like all the way up to the roofs of the houses. And they had up on this Moose Creek Plateau, they had a lot of dead lodgepole pine, and so they were laying out timber sales to salvage this timber, and they found that the best way to do it was on snowmobiles in the winter. And my husband did that for 3 winters and got stuck a lot trying to weave those snowmobiles through these lodgepole pine stands. But yeah, that was after that he wasn't too keen on snowmobiles for recreation because in his mind they meant work.
When you mentioned Yellowstone, that was one of the places that the guys from Marquette, Michigan, one of their trips went to Yellowstone.
Yeah,
and
that's a popular thing. That was it really was.
And that
I
was
was
like
working.
about 19, probably 74, maybe
Mhm.
75.
Yeah, this was
so for those days, you were out there, and there was no trails. You were making your own trails.
Mhm.
Those
Mhm.
guys really, they were Upper Michigan could be proud of the Peninsula Pathfinders. That was quite a grind.
Yeah, this was
I
76
saw there was
through
another.
79 that he was working up there. So about that same
Yeah,
era. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. Snowmobiles have improved a lot since then.
Yeah. My job in the neighboring district was to polish them and keep them oiled. I didn't get to ride one.
Well, if you ever get a chance, and I've been to several of the museums, but the best one without a doubt in the country is up there in Melbourne Way. That
I think
museum,
I've been up that way.
it is
Yeah.
fantastic. And they go, people bring them sleds with the histories to them. They have the histories. For example, there is a snowmobile up there that was made by the Alice Chalmers Company. And, you know, it was actually Alice Chalmers. They were getting into a lot of financial troubles, I guess the best way to explain it. They were looking for ways to improve their bottom line, new products or something. And they thought about snowmobiling, but two of the guys that worked for them, and I've written about it in the book, decided we should make some snowmobiles. And Alice Chalmers told him, you go ahead and do it, but you got to use parts from our inventory of what we have, and you got to do it on your own time. We're not paying you to do it. And they made three Alice Chalmers snowmobiles. One of them is at the Nobbin Way Museum. Another one went to got that one, and I don't know what happened to the other one, but they really made an effort to get Alice Chalmers into snowmobiling, and it didn't work.
I know. Debbie had a question.
Yeah, one quick one right here at the end. Is there one particular story that stands out in your mind as the weirdest, strangest snowmobile story?
Oh boy, here we go.
I can tell you a real. First, I'll explain this. I was involved in a lot of ways in snowmobiling. So you can understand my addiction, I guess. People at Pabst Blue Ribbon hired me on contract to put together the Pabst race team. We had the very first Pabst race team, and we raced all over the country. Raced at Sault Ste. Marie, not Sault Ste. Marie. We did go to Sault Ste. Marie. We raced from St. Paul, the Winnipeg to St. Paul race. Raced that 3 years. Raced Eagle River, you name it. We raced all over the country. But so I was involved in that. I also was involved in producing snowmobile shows, expositions. And we did them in Green Bay, Milwaukee, Fargo, Lansing, Duluth, we were all over the country doing these snowmobile shows. You know, come on in and see what's new in snowmobile. Had a lot of fun doing that for, I think, 6-7 years we did that. So, you know, my heart was in snowmobiling. Victor said, you got to write about something you're enthused about. But I think the craziest thing I ever did, and bear with me on this, after the first snowmobile show in Green Bay, a guy came to me and he said he had just done a cross-country thing without snow from San Francisco to New York to prove the durability of this particular track. It was made by Gates Rubber Company, and it wasn't snow, it was on the road. So his thing was to prove that, but he was one of these adventure type guys. And he came to me after the show, and I said, what are you going to do next, Tom? He said, I am going to go from Point Barrow, Alaska to Seattle, Washington. And I said, you're going to do what? And he said, I'm going to take a snowmobile from Point Barrow to Seattle. I thought, guys, he's crazy. I said, well, if you do that, you're going to need it. See, I was in news at that point. I said, you're going to need a newsman to film it and to spread the word. I said, you decide to do that, let me know, I'll go with you. Son of a gun, he decided to do it. He called me up. I'm at the TV station. He calls me at the TV station. Says, you ready to go to Point Barrow? What? He said, we're going to need lots of film and we're going to need lots of publicity. We're going to do this. We're going to go from Point Barrow, Alaska. See, that's why I say I know about the Brooks Mountain Range, to Seattle, Washington. So I said, okay, here we go. Well, I should have known there was a problem. He said he had a twin track machine that was made by the Allsport company out of Ohio. And it was going to be him. His name was Tom Schiffler. And it was going to be him and a mechanic from the company. And I was going to be the PR man. And away we were going to go to Point Barrow, Alaska with this machine and drive it back to Seattle, Washington. Well, as it happens, the mechanic, he knew the machine real well. I got a phone call about 2 weeks before our scheduled trip, and Mr. Schiffler told me, he said, "Can you find a mechanic? My mechanic doesn't want to go." So I was able to sweet talk the local Polaris dealer into an expense-paid trip to Alaska, to Point Barrow and back. So away we go. We load up this test machine behind a Blazer, and we head off from Point Barrow. We get as far with our little caravan there as Fairbanks, and at that point, he had it set up that we would fly from Fairbanks to Point Barrow, across the Brooks Mountain Range and so forth. And then we would drive back on the snowmobile and then join up with our support vehicle, which we had left in Fairbanks. Well, we get to Point Barrow, and it's just crazy. First of all, going up there, this is just in the early days of the discovering the oil at Prudhoe Bay, and they're building the ice road and so forth. So the plane we're on, half of this jet plane is cargo, including our snowmobile, and the front half of the plane is passengers, and most of them were oil guys from Houston, Texas. Okay, so we land first of all at Prudhoe Bay, and for the Texans to get out because they're going to do the oil thing, and then we take a look, and you just land on this big piece of frozen tundra. And then from there, it's cold. It is cold. So from there, we fly up to Point Barrow, unload the machine, and we have a trailer. And our fearless leader supposedly had set up with the Air National Guard to have air communications with us. Well, that didn't work either. So we've got the sled, we've got the trailer with extra parts and so forth, and our fearless leader finds an Eskimo who's going to go with us, be our guide across the Brooks Mountain Range, because he knows where they have gas kind of hidden along the way. So we would have gas. So we leave Point Barrow, and nothing's working. We come back to Point Barrow, and they're watching us. And everybody in town is watching. One of they call the white man a Geenoks. What are these Geenoks doing? So finally, we get things running again. And on the third trip out into the tundra, we go. The Navy has a research station out there, and we go by that, and we get out, and the machine breaks down again. And to tell you how cold it was, there's a jack shaft in that snowmobile from the engine to the drive, and the jack shaft actually broke in half. It was so cold, and so here we are. We're in the middle of the tundra. The Mr. Adventure, the Eskimo, and me, and along comes what they call a weasel, a diesel, whatever it was, from the Navy Research Center. And this guy pulls up, he says, "What are you guys doing out here?" So we're going to go to Seattle. We're going to cross the mountains. He said, "No, you're not. You're going to die out there is what's going to happen." And he said, "Let me take you back to the research station." So we load up our crippled snowmobile, our sled, takes us back to the research station. Fortunately, it's heated. And he said, guys, I wouldn't try this. I would not try this. So we go back to Point Barrow. Now here they're watching again. Here comes these guys again. We load the snowmobile on one of those beautiful airplanes, fly it back to Fairbanks. Now we get to Fairbanks, we've got at least the Blazer and a trailer load of spare parts that we can work from. So what we do, this is getting to be a long story, but anyhow, what we do is we load up the machine, this all sport machine, and we go halfway up what is called then the ice road. It's the road that they are building from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay to become transportation to haul stuff up there and so forth. So gas we've got, we go half of our supply of gas up the ice road, which was probably a couple of 100 miles north of Fairbanks, and then we turn around and we head south. So our mission started about 200 miles north of Fairbanks, and we head off to Seattle. Now, there was 100 things that happened to us trying to get to Seattle, but I'll only share one to try to make this short, because the machine would break down, and we get to Washington. In fact, we're in southern Canada. There's no snow. It's spring weather. It's beautiful. We go by a house, the lady's out hanging her clothes on the line. So the night before we get to downtown Seattle, and we look like a couple. None of us are shaved. We get grease from working on the machines. We got these big patches on the Alaskan All-Sport Expedition. And here we are. We're camped out in a shopping mall parking lot about, 30, 40 miles from downtown Seattle. So we get the machine running that morning, and we get it out along the highway. Now, this 4 lanes of divided highway going into downtown Seattle. Okay? So we're out there chugging along machine brakes, right? So being the mechanic, we're in trying to get things going again. Where's our adventure, our leader? We look up through the windows of this machine, and the media has found us. The TV stations have found us, and they're interviewing Mr. Adventure out there. They're doing interviews with him about all this going. And now there's 4 lanes of traffic, morning drive time, trying to get into Seattle. And we're parked outside. All of a sudden, state cop comes up. He says, "What is going on here?" So we told him, what our mission was. We wanted to go to downtown Seattle. Champion Spark Plug had a big press conference waiting for us and all this stuff. And we'd gotten a lot of publicity, I'll say that. And he said, "I don't want to go down in history as the guy who stopped the all-sport Alaskan Exposition." He said, "You want to get to downtown Seattle, right?" I said, "Yeah, big press conference, He said, "You see the top of that hill? That's Seattle city limits. When you get this thing running, I'll go with you. We'll get it to the top of the hill, load it up on your trailer, and drive to whatever hotel it was in downtown Seattle where they're going to have this big press conference." So that was our trip from Point Barrow to Seattle. Was a total disaster. Almost as bad as the guy that went to Seattle with the big machine. But it was fun. I mean, lots of adventures, and I should have written a book about that. But anyhow, it was interesting. I did have the opportunity to track Mr. Shiflett down again to see what happened to him next. In his next adventure, he was going to ride a motorcycle to the top of Mount Fuji in Japan. Well, if you know anything about Japan, Mount Fuji is sacred, and you don't ride a motorcycle on top of Mount Fuji. He tried, and the Japanese authorities, last I heard, took him into custody. I don't know where it went from there, but I was glad to be rid of Mr. Tom Schiff. So yeah, my life has been filled with snow.
I gotta go.
Go ahead.
Wow. Well, Larry, that's a good stories there. And I'm just sharing. Bill wrote some stuff on the chat that he was he enjoyed. What did he say exactly? He enjoyed your talk as well. And he's working on some new books. But yeah, it says lots of fascinating stories. He wanted to know where to buy the book, and I directed him to a few places that are selling it. So, wow, thank you, Larry.
Yeah.
And in the Sioux, we did snowmobile into the Sioux. We went across the International Bridge. So you could tell them we've been to the Sioux by snowmobile.
Wow. Yeah, really good. Okay, any final questions or comments before we wrap it up tonight?
Just
Okay.
want to point out that it's 3,000 miles from Point Barrow to Seattle, and there are still no roads to this day.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow. Yeah.
we went up the Alaska Highway, went from where I think Dawson is where you get onto it, and you go up through Anchorage, outside of Anchorage, and finally you end up in Fairbanks. But you're right. There's no roads to Point Barrow, that's for sure. In fact, you don't call it Point Barrow anymore. They had an election this past year, and it's now got an Eskimo name. And I don't know what it is. I couldn't pronounce it if I did know. So.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Well, thank you. I think given these stories, it's really amazing you're here tonight talking to us about all this, and then you got to write a book. So
probably what saved me, I did race. I did race on the PAPS team, but I wasn't an avid racer. So I didn't get hurt, at least not very much. Okay? Guys that were really, a lot of them got hurt. In fact, we lost a team member in an accident, But I was too busy having fun. It was all about it.
Yeah, good. Well, enjoyed the talk tonight, and I do wish everybody, I thank you again, Larry, and I wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and stay posted. Depending on how things go, we might have a January meeting. We might not meet till February. We'll just have to see how things shake out once we get our announcement list. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
You've been watching the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. To join or for more information, please visit us at www.upa.org or www.upnotable.com.